Ahora seguimos con otro de nuestros colegas de IAB Europe. Voy a pasar de nuevo al inglés para presentarle. Y bueno, pues él nos va a hablar de un estudio que han elaborado desde IAB Europe sobre el impacto socioeconómico y cultural de la publicidad digital para estos diferentes sectores. Bien, we have with us Dr. Daniel Knapp. Daniel Knapp is the Chief Economist at IAB Europe. He is an advertising and media analyst with more than 15 years of international experience. As I told in advance, he's the author of a very important report about the wider socioeconomic and cultural value of targeted advertising in Europe. And he's going to explain to us the data, the figures, and how a possible ban of target advertising would have unintended consequences and hinder Europe efforts and created a digital space for the future. Thank you very much, Daniel, for being with us. I give you the floor, and thanks a lot.
Great pleasure. Thank you so much for the kind invitation. I'm very pleased to be here. I would like to speak to you about, indeed, what was just described, the broader socio-economic impact and cultural value of targeted advertising. Why is that? There are plenty of studies out there from large consultancy firms, from the public sector, that look at the economic value of digital advertising, i.e. job creation, contribution to GDP, and so forth. However, in particular, when we look at targeted advertising, it is not merely an economic equation. There are broader factors at play. There are broader factors that a targeted advertising world supports that are important for the sustained growth and prosperity in Europe, which means we need to widen our lens, not just look at the direct economic impact, but look at the broader sociocultural considerations and also at where we as a European Union with a digital strategy want to go and how targeted advertising is actually baked into that journey. So without further ado, the agenda today looks as follows. I would first like to make an argument that targeted digital advertising enables the proliferation of small and medium-sized businesses. Many of you have heard this argument a lot over the last couple of months. However, I want to support it with some data that looks really under the hood of this ad economy and quantifies this impact. Secondly, I want to say that it isn't just about any SMEs, although Europe is very SME dependent, but we have many SMEs of high cultural and social value which do rely on targeted advertising. And thirdly, broadly, when we look at Europe's strategy, I want to argue that European champions in their path to digital maturity and digital competition in a globalized world do require targeted advertising to acquire, retain, maintain customers. And lastly, it would be amiss to not mention the fourth estate, i.e. the role of media, which although revenue sources are diversifying, subscription on top of advertising and so forth, in particular the addressable notion of advertising, again with global competition, is vital for European companies to be able to do. Now we all know that what is targeted advertising is changing. There isn't one single definition. Sometimes when we look at debates in Brussels, there seems to be a highly ideological debate about what targeted advertising is. The key thing to take away from this slide is that the world of targeted advertising is in flux. A new ecosystem, a new infrastructure is being built after third-party cookies, after the current regime, which seeks to marry privacy considerations on the one hand and the ability to provide addressable advertising on the other. And this could be with logged-in users with personal information which is consented to. Large online platforms, walled gardens have that. It could be sharing of IDs, collaboration across different publishers in Europe. We've got many initiatives there. Even the European Commission is funding initiatives to look at European data spaces in the media sector, which might include advertising, but also go beyond it. We've got segments which are just not PIR, but broad groups of people. And we got flocks, which were now being replaced by topics, i.e. Google's approach to group people together based on AI principles. And we got the resurgence of context, i.e. editorial context, weather, time of day, and so forth. These are all things around targeted advertising. So when we speak about targeted advertising, we need to look at this full spectrum of approaches available and not exclude one a priori right now before it has had time to mature. Overall, we can see digital advertising was crucial to mitigate the impact of COVID-19 on the European economy. You can see on this chart here, if you read it from the bottom to the top, a continuous revision of our forecasts in 2020, as it was clear that many other media, advertising media, remained depressed, but that digital advertising was actually growing despite the economic headwinds. And the key reason is that many companies that use digital advertising needed it to succeed as they pivoted from a brick and mortar economy to a digital economy. And many of those are actually SMEs. SMEs are self-proclaimed by the European Commission the backbone of Europe's economy. They play a key role in nearly every sector in Europe. And Europe sees these SMEs and their success as important to, number one, usher Europe into a digital future, but also ensure a sustainable, climate-neutral economy that also provides technological sovereignty and resilience to external shocks. Now, this is a heavy burden on SMEs to do. So SMEs need to acquire customers, retain them, grow, and so forth. And we can see how large they are by looking at this data here from the European Commission itself. 21 million SMEs in Europe currently employ 84 million people. That varies across countries, how it's distributed, but there's a uniform picture across Europe that SMEs in every country are an integral part to the economy. Sometimes a bit higher, sometimes a bit lower, but in all countries, it's majorly important. These SMEs have had trouble during COVID-19 into 2020 and 2021, and they're now slowly emerging out of the pandemic. You can see various studies. We quoted here one from McKinsey, which demonstrates that in key European territories, including Spain, many SMEs felt the impact, revenue impact, other commercial impacts, supply chain impacts, etc., imposed by COVID-19. At the same time, there's a positive picture. We see, as we're moving out of the pandemic, new growth, record growth in business registrations in the EU 27. Meaning, as we're coming out of the pandemic, new businesses are being started. These businesses are often reacting to macro changes in how consumers buy and use goods and services. And that means it's predominantly digital. So many of the companies being launched now are what we would call digital endemics, i.e. companies born in the digital world, having a digital-first business model. And they require digital tools to make their business possible, as they're replacing the physical store with, in a sense, rent paid through advertising, using e-commerce channels and others to acquire customers. And we can see here on this chart here, Spain is slightly above the European, slightly below the European average still. If you look at on the left slide, we see internet users who bought goods or services online for private use. There was a major growth during 2020, during the pandemic. New data from Eurostat is going to come out soon, and we expect that this proportion of people who've done that at least once in 2020, 2021 is going to increase even further, meaning an e-commerce, an online-first business is essential for SMEs. And we can see that the SMEs worked hard actually in 2020 and beyond to build resilience and adapt to the model. And I really like this quote here from Accenture that said SMBs, small and medium-sized businesses, are reliant on online channels. They're running their business, the legacy business at day and digitizing at night. This shift is what many companies have done. And while they've done that, they've realized the following thing, that they can't really cut spending on digital advertising, but in fact, they need it to get those customers into those digital storefronts. What you can see here is during 2020, a shift of expectations around the use of digital advertising as the pandemic progressed. In March, there was panic mode. Many thought about spending less or maybe holding spend steady, but not increasing it. In April, we already saw a higher proportion of those who wanted to keep spend steady and increase it. And in September, the picture has changed entirely. Behind this is the idea that SMEs saw digital ads, targeted digital ads, as a lifeline during lockdown. targeted in particular because they couldn't afford to reach broad audiences, to have wastage included in the ads. It needed to really be cost effective. And even if we look at things more broadly, we can see that digital ads are crucial not just for any business, but more widely for the exchange within the single market. On the left here, we can see the proportion of advertisers, SMEs and major marketers, the big Fortune 500 in Europe. And then we can see how this looks in digital, where we can see the small SMEs or SMBs, 72% of the ads go to digital advertising versus 40% go into digital in other advertisers, meaning a higher exposure to digital advertising for these SMBs, just for the reasons I just mentioned. It's highly cost effective, it's targeted, it's measurable, etc. And they can't afford to go on TV or on pricey broad reach channels often. Crucially, we can also see that these businesses are important for cross-border exchange, and also that advertising is being done across borders, meaning a Spanish company advertising in Germany, in Poland, and so forth to advertise its goods. And we already see that 15% of digital advertising today in the EU 27 was transnational, i.e. one advertiser paying ads in another country to attract their goods and to attract attention for their goods and services. Meaning we need to just not consider national or local economies, but see targeted ads also as a vehicle to attract, spend consumer attention within the single digital market. So it's clear, targeted advertising fuels SME businesses and success. They need to measure digital return on investment, minimize wastage, etc. They can't afford sending messages to consumers who are not interested in their products and services, and it's vital for recovery. And we're not the only ones seeing that. Even Margarete Vestager has actually acknowledged this specifically. Now, as I mentioned at the outset, it's not just about any SMEs, but we're seeing a very large sector of 75 billion euros, that was in the EU 28, including the UK still, this study, that shows that key cultural assets, local artisanal products and others are very important. And for those businesses, it's also key to be able to advertise, to sell, in order to preserve those goods and services. There's a wonderful case study actually from Italy, which the Financial Times illustrated in great detail. Many different case studies, but this one here really stood out for me. You had a tie maker at the shores of Lake Como in northern Italy, who at the age of 70 was starting to use different ways, including search, of targeted advertising to bring his business online. And we're seeing lots of these things happening where legacy businesses, mom and pop shops, small traditional industries are actually taking the leap to digital distribution and using digital ads to keep alive and to grow. Similar sector is tourism. We can see just how important tourism is. You can see Spain on the very left side as a proportion of GDP, and the entire tourism industry is moving towards digital. So if we look, for instance, at ad spend, we can see that many SMEs, which are crucial in the tourism sector, they over-index on digital ads. Small travel advertisers spend more on digital advertising proportionately out of their overall budget than, for instance, mid-sized or large advertisers, again, due to low access barriers. Lastly, targeted ads also do help European champions, i.e. European unicorns or venture-funded companies that are competing in the digital world on the global stage to help them thrive. We saw overall Europe is becoming quite competitive on the global stage, with venture funding was through the roof in H1 2021, with new unicorns being minted in many European countries. And we're seeing many of these companies, they're digital endemics, they invest massively in marketing. Here are a couple of those digital endemics. We got Delivery Hero here from Berlin, for instance, others here from the US. But I took those from the US because we have so much data on them. But they behave quite similarly, meaning high revenue growth on the one hand, look at the left chart here, but then also extremely high marketing spend growth, often exceeding revenue growth to capture market share. And this group is spending so much on advertising that this benchmark group that I have here spends about 22% of their entire revenues on marketing to grow. And they need it to be marketing that is cost effective. So for instance, here we can see Delivery Hero on the previous slide use targeted ads to reduce customer acquisition costs by nearly 42%, really to ensure that ads are economically viable. You can see many of those companies find ads so important, they're not outsourcing it to an agency, but they're actually taking it in-house. It's something that's so integral to their operations that they want to have full control over it, such as you can see the job ad here for Klarna for a CRM marketing manager. Also, Europe is becoming more competitive within the targeted ad segment itself. The late gift of GDPR, as I call it, means we have a new wave of companies that are thinking about and working on targeted advertising that's coming out of Europe that puts privacy and innovation first. And here's a list of some of those companies and their funding. So it's vital that if we want to have a voice in Europe in shaping this sector, that we are in dialogue with these companies and enable them to thrive. Lastly, we look at media. We can see many European media are already innovating with privacy-first targeting approaches. So here's a list of domains, Europe and other countries, that have so-called first-party IDs, which is new identifiers that are on the publisher page that allow them to do targeting without third-party cookies. We can see again, Europe here is ahead of the curve. And lastly, if we expand the horizon slightly and look at not just publishers, but also at the TV sector, we can see TV and the video world converging more and more. We need to be careful because there might be an EU media innovation paradox. The European Commission has, on the one hand, recognized the need to really reboot the media sector. But a blanket ban on targeted ads would actually put this in question. It could risk Europe's own policy aims of strengthening the media ecosystem as companies become more risk averse in investing in data and approaches to innovate around data. So let me conclude. There are 3 points I would like to leave you with. The first one is that targeted advertising in Europe is more than just about mere business. It's about broader things, about SMEs, of digital champions, the media sector, of things of broader cultural and social value, and our own competitiveness. I think it's important to move beyond ideological debates and actually see how can we in Europe constructively, on all sides of the table, shape the future of privacy and targeting at the same time to bring this under one roof. I think we have an opportunity to do this, maybe as the only continent in the world. And lastly, the discussion we are having today is going to pervade all industries. Advertising is just a canary in the coal mine, meaning as all industries, from retail to agriculture to steel, become underpinned by data, what we're currently doing in advertising in the policy world can become a recipe for any other industry to see how can we deal with issues of data-driven innovation on the one hand and privacy on the other. So let's do a constructive debate within the ad sector with the policy sector to understand how we can shape collaboratively Europe's future that respects privacy, but also enables data innovation approaches. My full report, if you would like to read it, is available under this link. I believe we will distribute the slides after this presentation as well. Now, thank you very much for attending today, for listening to myself, my colleagues, and if you have any questions, I shall remain at your disposal. Thank you very much for joining today, and all the best.